Lisa Carter, a 17-year-old high school senior, was walking home after spending the afternoon at her best friend's house. It was a peaceful evening, the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lisa loved this time of day. The air was cool, the streets were quiet, and she enjoyed listening to her favorite music through her headphones. She had taken this road home hundreds of times before. The neighborhood was familiar, safe, or at least, that's what she thought. She had no idea that this walk would change her life forever. A police car slowly turned onto her street. Lisa didn't think much of it at first. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't in a hurry. She was just walking, minding her own business. But then she noticed something strange. The car wasn't just passing by. It was following her. Lisa glanced over her shoulder. The car had picked up speed, and a voice came through the patrol car's loudspeaker. "You, stop where you are." Lisa froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. She pulled her headphones off, looking around to see if the officer was talking to someone else. But there was no one else on the sidewalk. Confused, she pointed to herself. "Me." The police car pulled up beside her, and the window rolled down. Officer Mark Reynolds, a tall man with sharp features and a stern expression, stared at her. His eyes were cold, as if he had already decided something about her before she even spoke. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Lisa swallowed hard. "I'm just walking home," she answered politely. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "Where do you live?" Lisa hesitated. She didn't know why he was questioning her like this. She had done nothing wrong. "Just a few blocks away," she said carefully. "That's funny," Reynolds said, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "Because we had a report about someone suspicious in this area. And you fit the description." Lisa's stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. She had heard stories like this before, seen them on the news, but she never thought it would happen to her. "I think there's a mistake," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I haven't done anything." But Reynolds was already stepping out of the car. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. Lisa's hands trembled as she raised them slightly. "Sir, I—" "Get on the ground," he interrupted. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. "Why?" "Don't question me," Reynolds barked. She took a step back, fear creeping up her spine. This wasn't right. She hadn't broken any laws. She wasn't a threat. She was just a teenager trying to go home. And yet, in the officer's eyes, she was something else. Someone to be controlled. Then, before she could react, he reached for his radio. "K9 unit, stand by," he said. Lisa's heart stopped. Dogs. She had never felt this kind of fear before. Lisa stood frozen, her heart racing in her chest. She could feel the weight of the officer's gaze on her, and the cold dread settling in her stomach. She didn't understand why this was happening. She was just walking home, minding her own business, and now this officer seemed determined to treat her like a criminal. "Please, I haven't done anything," she tried again, her voice shaky. But Officer Reynolds wasn't listening. His face remained hard and unreadable. "Stay where you are," he ordered as he reached for his radio. Lisa could hear him talking to someone on the other end, something about a K9 unit. She didn't know much about police dogs, but she had heard that they could be dangerous. She wasn't sure what to expect, but her mind was racing with fear. She took a small step back, hoping to put some space between herself and the officer. "I just want to go home. Please don't make me do this," she pleaded. But Reynolds didn't seem interested in hearing her. Instead, he opened the back door of the police car, and a large, muscular dog leaped out onto the sidewalk. Lisa flinched as the dog landed on the ground with a heavy thud. Its ears perked and its eyes locked onto her. The dog was big, much bigger than she had imagined. Its sharp, alert eyes glinted in the fading sunlight, and its muscles were tense, ready for whatever command its handler gave. "Stay still," Reynolds said coldly, watching her every move. Lisa's legs felt weak, but she stood her ground. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why was she being treated like this? The dog growled low in its throat, and Lisa's breath hitched. She felt a wave of panic sweep over her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her mind was spinning, trying to come up with a way to get out of this situation. But the more she thought about it, the more trapped she felt. She kept her hands in the air as the officer and the dog moved closer. It was like being caught in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She felt as if her world had turned upside down in just a few minutes. "I'm not a threat," she whispered, but the words felt empty. Reynolds didn't seem to care. The officer gave the canine a command, and the dog's ears perked up. Lisa could feel its gaze on her, and she couldn't help but shudder. The dog was just following orders, but Lisa felt like it could tear her apart in an instant if the officer gave the wrong command. But just as the dog took a step forward, something unexpected happened. Lisa heard a familiar sound, her phone ringing. It was her father's name flashing across the screen. She had forgotten to turn it off when she left her friend's house, but now she didn't care. Without thinking, she quickly reached into her pocket and grabbed her phone, pressing the button to answer. "Dad," she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, please help me. There's a cop. He's got his dog on me." Her voice broke, and she could hear the concern in her father's voice on the other end of the line. "Stay calm, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I'll be there in a few minutes. You just stay where you are. Don't move." Lisa felt a small sense of relief wash over her. Her father was coming. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this. Lisa's heart raced as she heard her father's voice on the phone. It was the first time since this nightmare began that she felt a small glimmer of hope. "Stay calm, sweetheart," her dad said again, his voice firm but reassuring. "I'll be there soon. Just keep your distance from that officer and the dog. Help is on the way." She nodded, even though her father couldn't see her. She didn't dare move. The canine was still close by, its eyes locked onto her, and she could feel the tension in the air. She felt like a cornered animal, trapped with no way out. Reynolds, the officer, was still watching her, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem to care that Lisa was frightened, or that she was just a teenager walking home from a friend's house. In his eyes, she was just a suspect. The dog's growl broke the silence again, sending a fresh wave of fear through Lisa. But she focused on her father's words. "Stay calm. Help is on the way." Every second felt like an eternity as she waited, standing there with the officer's dog growling in front of her. She tried to steady her breath, but her heart was pounding so loudly in her chest that it was hard to think. All she wanted was to get home, to be safe again, and away from this terrifying situation. Reynolds seemed to sense her anxiety. He stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. "You're not going anywhere until I say so," he said. Lisa's stomach twisted. She felt as if the walls were closing in on her. The police officer and his dog towered over her, and she was utterly powerless to do anything about it. But then, the sound of a car engine in the distance reached her ears. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. Could it be her father? She quickly glanced up the street, hoping to see the familiar shape of her dad's car. There, in the distance, she saw a black sedan speeding toward them, its headlights cutting through the fading sunlight. It was him, her dad. Judge Thomas Carter, a man of authority, respect, and strength, had always been there for her. Lisa had always felt safe in his presence, and now, as he drove toward her, she felt that sense of security rushing back. The officer, Reynolds, saw the car too. He hesitated for a moment as it grew closer. Lisa could see the slight change in his expression, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The sedan came to a stop just a few feet away from where Lisa stood. The engine was still running, but the car doors opened, and out stepped her father, his face set in a hard line. Lisa could hear the click of his shoes against the pavement as he walked toward them. Judge Carter didn't need to say anything. The power in his presence was enough. Reynolds, realizing who had arrived, stepped back slightly, his eyes flicking nervously between Lisa and the judge. But Lisa could see it. The moment he realized he had made a huge mistake. Her father was a man of justice, and he wasn't going to let this stand. Lisa could feel her breath calming as her dad walked toward her, his every step radiating authority. The fear that had gripped her heart started to fade. Her dad was here. And no one, not even Officer Reynolds, was going to hurt her now. Judge Thomas Carter walked toward his daughter, his eyes never leaving Officer Reynolds. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, but Lisa felt a sense of relief wash over her as her father's presence surrounded her. She had always known her dad as a calm, controlled man, but now, standing beside her, he radiated power and authority. Reynolds, who had been so confident just moments ago, now looked uncertain. The moment he realized who Lisa's father was, his posture changed. He stepped back slightly, his hand still gripping the leash of the canine, but his eyes darted nervously from Lisa to the judge. "Judge Carter," Officer Reynolds said, his voice stiff and uncomfortable. He seemed to struggle for the right words, but the judge didn't seem to care. "I don't know what's going on here," Judge Carter said in a low, controlled voice, "but this is not how you treat my daughter." His words weren't loud, but they were clear and firm. The kind of words that made everyone listen. Lisa stood quietly beside her father, still in shock, but grateful for his calm presence. Her father had always taught her that justice was about fairness and truth. Now she saw him embody those values in a way that made her feel proud. "Officer, what exactly is happening here?" Judge Carter continued, his tone steady. "Why did you pull my daughter over? And why are you threatening her with a police dog?" Reynolds shifted his weight nervously from one foot to the other. "She matched the description of a suspect," he said, avoiding eye contact with the judge. His voice faltered slightly. "I had to investigate." Lisa's heart sank. She had heard those words before, on the news, in stories about other people who had been wrongly accused. She couldn't believe she was now in that position. But with her father there, things were starting to feel like they could be made right again. "My daughter was walking home, doing nothing wrong," Judge Carter said, his voice steady but sharp, "and I'm not going to allow you to treat her this way." Reynolds seemed to hesitate, his eyes flicking between Lisa and the judge. He didn't have an answer. He couldn't justify his actions. And deep down, he knew he had overstepped. Judge Carter turned to Lisa, his gaze softening. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Lisa nodded, still shaken but feeling safer now that her father was there. "I'm fine, Dad. I just want to go home." With a sigh of relief, Judge Carter turned back to Reynolds. "You'll be hearing from my office soon. I'm filing a formal complaint about your behavior today. This isn't how police officers should be treating innocent people." Reynolds didn't say anything. He simply stood there, unable to argue, knowing that the judge's words were true. He couldn't change what had happened. The power had shifted now, and there was no going back. Lisa's father gave a small nod, signaling that the conversation was over. "Let's go home, Lisa," he said, his voice gentle as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. As they turned to walk away, Lisa felt her fear slowly slip away. She knew her father would make sure justice was served, and that feeling of safety and strength returned to her. For the first time since this all started, Lisa felt like everything was going to be okay. The next few days were a whirlwind for Lisa and her father. After the confrontation with Officer Reynolds, things didn't slow down. Judge Carter immediately began working with his team of lawyers to take action against the officer's treatment of Lisa. He knew that what had happened wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was part of a larger pattern, one that needed to be addressed. Lisa tried to focus on school, but it was hard to concentrate. Her mind kept returning to that moment on the sidewalk, the officer's cold eyes, and the menacing dog. She couldn't shake the feeling of being unfairly treated. It was as if everything she had been taught about justice and fairness had been flipped upside down. Her father, however, was determined to make sure things would change. He worked around the clock, meeting with lawyers and civil rights advocates. Lisa could hear him on the phone, speaking in his calm but firm voice, making sure that the situation would be taken seriously. She admired his strength, but at the same time, she could feel the weight of his stress. Lisa knew that the case against Officer Reynolds was about more than just what happened to her. It was about protecting others from suffering the same treatment. Her father had always taught her that justice wasn't just about winning, but about doing what was right. Now, more than ever, she understood what he meant. The news of the incident quickly spread. Lisa's story was picked up by local newspapers, and soon the media was covering it from every angle. Reporters were calling, asking for interviews, and people in the community were reaching out to show their support. Lisa was surprised by how many people felt strongly about what had happened. She had no idea that so many people were watching, but she also realized that her voice could make a difference. As the story gained attention, more people came forward with their own experiences. Other victims of Officer Reynolds' actions shared their stories, some of which were even more troubling than Lisa's. It became clear that this wasn't just one bad encounter. It was part of a much larger issue. Lisa's father used this momentum to push for real change. He filed an official complaint against Reynolds, calling for an investigation into the officer's actions. His words were clear and powerful, demanding accountability from the police department. Despite all the attention, Lisa tried to keep a low profile. She didn't want to be in the spotlight, but she knew that by standing up, she was helping to create a path for change. Her father made sure she understood that her bravery wasn't just about confronting the officer. It was about showing others that they didn't have to stay silent. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began. Lisa's father worked closely with a group of dedicated civil rights lawyers who helped push for transparency. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and built a case that would challenge the system. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but Lisa could see how determined her father was to make sure justice was done. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what she had. With her father leading the charge, Lisa felt ready to face whatever came next. As the days passed, Lisa began to see just how deep the issue went. Her father's battle wasn't just about getting justice for her. It was about uncovering a pattern of behavior within the police department that had been hidden for too long. Judge Carter and his team worked tirelessly, speaking to former colleagues, reviewing old records, and digging into the history of Officer Reynolds. What they discovered was shocking. It turned out that Reynolds wasn't an isolated case. He had a history of profiling and using aggressive tactics on people of color, often targeting them without cause. Lisa's father, using his experience and position, helped bring this to light. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a one-off mistake. It was part of a much bigger problem within the force. Lisa was amazed by her father's determination. She had always known he was a man of justice, but now, seeing how he worked behind the scenes, she truly understood the extent of his commitment to doing what was right. Despite the long hours and the pressure, her father never wavered. He was focused on making sure that Officer Reynolds would be held accountable for his actions, and that other innocent people wouldn't have to face the same treatment. The media continued to cover the story, and as more victims came forward, the pressure on the police department mounted. Lisa's experience was no longer just a local news story. It had become a symbol of a larger issue that needed to be addressed. People across the country were watching, and many were offering their support. This growing attention gave the case momentum. But with the attention also came resistance. Some members of the police force tried to downplay the situation, insisting that it was just a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. They wanted to protect their own, but the evidence was mounting against them. Lisa's father remained calm, not letting the pressure distract him from the task at hand. He knew that if they were going to make real change, they needed to stay focused. Lisa couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, she was proud of what her father was doing, but on the other, the weight of the situation was starting to affect her. She didn't want to be the center of a media storm. She didn't ask for this attention, but every time she saw her father's face, strong and determined. She remembered why this fight was so important. The case reached a turning point when a group of former officers who had witnessed Reynolds' behavior came forward. They gave powerful testimonies, describing how Reynolds had acted inappropriately in the past. Their accounts, combined with the video footage from Lisa's encounter, were undeniable proof that Reynolds had crossed a line. The police department could no longer deny the truth. Internal Affairs began a full investigation into Reynolds' actions, and his record was scrutinized. Lisa's father wasn't about to let this case be buried. He made it clear that they would not stop until there was full accountability. Lisa saw how much work it took to bring this all to light, but she also saw the courage in her father's eyes. His fight was now bigger than just the case against one officer. It was about changing a system that had allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. The road ahead was long, but Lisa knew that, with her father leading the charge, justice was finally on the horizon. The day of the trial arrived, and Lisa could hardly believe how much had changed in such a short time. What had started as a terrifying moment on the sidewalk was now the focus of a courtroom battle. It was no longer just about her. It was about justice for everyone who had been unfairly treated, about making sure something like this never happened again. Lisa sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, her father beside her. She had seen him in action before, but never like this. Today, he wasn't just her dad. He was a judge, a man of the law who had dedicated his life to fairness and truth. Lisa could feel the weight of the moment. This was the culmination of everything they had been working for, and it was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for what was right. As the trial began, the room fell silent. The prosecution team stood first, presenting the case against Officer Reynolds. Lisa listened intently as they outlined the officer's history of misconduct, his aggressive behavior, and how he had misused his position of power. The video footage of Lisa's encounter was shown, and the whole courtroom watched in silence as the events unfolded. Lisa felt a rush of emotions as she saw herself on the screen again. She had never expected her life to be on display like this, but seeing the footage made her realize just how far she had come. Her father's efforts to bring justice to light were beginning to bear fruit. The prosecutor called witness after witness, all testifying to Reynolds' past behavior and showing that this wasn't an isolated incident. One by one, former officers who had worked with Reynolds came forward to describe how he had acted inappropriately in previous situations. Their testimony painted a clear picture of an officer who had repeatedly abused his authority. Lisa sat still, her heart pounding. She couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as each new piece of evidence strengthened the case. This was no longer just her word against Reynolds. The truth was undeniable. Then it was Reynolds' turn to defend himself. He stood, his face tense, as his lawyer tried to explain away his actions. They claimed that Reynolds had been following proper procedure, that he had been acting out of concern for public safety. But Lisa could see through the lies. She knew that nothing about what happened that day had been about safety. It had been about power, control, and unfair treatment. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, but their stories were solid. There was no turning back now. The evidence was overwhelming. The courtroom was quiet as everyone waited for the judge's ruling. Lisa felt her hands tremble as the time for the verdict approached. She had waited so long for this moment, and now it was finally here. Her father, calm and composed, gave her a reassuring glance. He knew the fight wasn't over yet, but the pieces were falling into place. The judge, after what seemed like an eternity, stood. The courtroom held its breath as he prepared to read the verdict. Lisa's heart was racing in her chest. She knew that this moment would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. The judge cleared his throat, his voice steady and clear as he delivered the verdict. The room waited in silence, but Lisa felt a sense of hope surge within her. The battle for justice was finally reaching its conclusion. The moment of truth had arrived. The entire courtroom was tense as the judge stood and prepared to deliver his verdict. Lisa's heart raced, and she could feel the sweat on her palms. She had waited for this day for so long, But now that it was finally here, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what would come next. Her father sat beside her, his face calm and collected. He had been through many trials in his career, but Lisa knew how much this case meant to him. It wasn't just about holding Officer Reynolds accountable. It was about standing up for what was right, for justice, and for the truth. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked around the room, his voice echoing through the quiet space. After carefully considering the evidence presented and the testimonies of the witnesses, I find that Officer Mark Reynolds has engaged in behavior that goes against the principles of fairness and respect that our law enforcement should uphold. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. She could hardly believe it. The judge's words were exactly what they had hoped for, but hearing them aloud made everything feel real. This wasn't just a fight for her. It was a fight for every person who had ever been treated unfairly. The judge paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Then he continued. Officer Reynolds is found guilty of excessive use of force and misconduct. He violated the trust placed in him by the public, and as a result, he will face the appropriate consequences. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She looked at her father, who gave her a small nod of reassurance. This was it, the moment they had worked so hard for. The moment when justice was finally served. As the judge handed down the sentencing, Reynolds stood motionless. The look on his face was a mix of disbelief and regret. He had fought to defend himself, but in the end, the truth had come out. His actions had been wrong, and now he would have to face the consequences. Lisa couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about winning the case. It was about knowing that the system could work, that justice could prevail. She thought about all the people who had supported her and her father along the way. Their voices had made a difference. The judge continued. As part of the sentence, Officer Reynolds will be permanently removed from the police force and will serve time for his actions. The room remained silent as the impact of the sentence settled in. It was a powerful moment, one that would be remembered for years to come. Lisa felt her eyes well up with tears. It was finally over. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had helped bring about real change. As they left the courtroom, her father put an arm around her shoulders, a proud smile on his face. "We did it, Lisa," he said softly. "This is just the beginning. Change takes time, but today, we've taken an important step forward." Lisa nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. It had been a difficult journey, but now she felt stronger and more confident than ever. And she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always fight for what was right. The trial was over, and the verdict had been delivered. But for Lisa, the journey was far from finished. The relief she felt after the court ruling was only the beginning of her healing process. The emotional scars from the terrifying encounter with Officer Reynolds would take time to heal, but the sense of justice and the support from her family helped her find peace. In the weeks that followed, Lisa's life slowly began to return to normal. She returned to school, but it wasn't easy. Some students avoided her, while others praised her for standing up and speaking out. Lisa felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to be herself again. But she knew that her experience had made a difference, and that made her feel a little less uncertain about the attention. Her father, Judge Carter, continued to work behind the scenes, pushing for reforms within the police department. His determination had been unwavering throughout the entire ordeal, and now he was focused on ensuring that other families wouldn't have to face the same kind of fear that Lisa had. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" her father asked one evening as they sat down for dinner. It had been a busy week for him, but he always made sure to check in on Lisa, to make sure she was doing well. Lisa smiled softly, though she knew it was still a struggle. "I'm better, Dad. I think I'm starting to feel like myself again. But sometimes I still think about that day." Judge Carter nodded, understanding the weight his daughter carried. "It's normal, honey. You've been through something no one should ever have to experience. Healing takes time, and you'll get there at your own pace. What matters is that you're not alone. You have the strength, and we'll get through this together." Lisa felt comforted by his words. The support from her father, her family, and the community meant the world to her. She wasn't alone in this fight, and that gave her the strength to keep moving forward. Over time, Lisa began to take on a new role in her community. She started speaking at local events about what happened to her, not for attention, but to inspire others to stand up for themselves and speak out when they faced injustice. Her father had taught her the importance of using one's voice for good, and now Lisa was doing just that. At the same time, she started focusing on her studies and her passions. She had always been interested in writing, and now, more than ever, she felt a need to tell her story. Not just about the fear and the struggle, but about the power of resilience, of standing up, and of fighting for change. Lisa's bond with her father grew even stronger. Through everything, he had been her rock. He had fought for her, and now he was helping her find a way to heal. Together, they made a powerful team. As the months passed, Lisa began to feel more like herself again. She still thought about that day, but it no longer controlled her. She had found her voice, and she would continue to use it to fight for what was right. The experience had changed her, but it had also empowered her to make a difference in the world. Lisa knew there would always be challenges ahead, but she had her father's strength and the lessons she had learned from this journey. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that justice and courage would always guide her path.